Hey everyone, Michael here with Hello Cupcake It's Me, and this is a spotlight series that I do every June to spotlight LGBTQ history during Pride Month. Um, some of the videos that I've made in the past have gotten really good responses. Other videos, people have left like really negative comments talking about like the way that I talk and my readability and all that other stuff. And you know, if that is what you're focusing on, then you're not going to get the content that I'm trying to provide to you. So I need you to understand that one, I'm dyslexic and I'm doing the best I can reading the scripts and everything else that I have printed out for doing this particular show or whatever else. So, if that is going to be something that bothers you, then I need you to go ahead and leave the video. But today's video is spotlighting the lavender scare of the mid 20th century. So basically, the lavender scare was this huge like uproar talking about the gays and lesbians in government offices, and it was kind of paralleled to the anti-communist campaign of McCarthy, and a lot of really good men and women lost their high-ranking government official jobs because they were gay. And it was just this whole bullshit thing. So I'm going to read what I have here and discuss discuss it as well. So please bear with me if I start stammering and stuttering over words, okay? So, the Lavender Scare was a moral panic about homosexual people in the United States government, which led to the mass dismissal of government service during the mid 20th century. It contributed to and paralleled the anti-communist campaign, which was also known as McCarthyism, and the Social Red Scare. Gay men and lesbians were said to be national security risks and the communist sympathizers, which led to the call and the removal of them from state employment. It was also thought that gay people were more susceptible to being manipulated, which could pose a threat to the country. Lesbians were less risk of persecution than gay men, but some lesbians were interrogated and lost their jobs. The Lavender Scare normalized persecutions of homosexuals through the bureaucratic institutionalization of homophobia. Former U.S. Senator Alan K. Simpson wrote, "The so-called Red Scare has been the main focus of most of historians of that time period. A lesser-known element, and one that harmed far more people, was the witch hunt McCarthy and others conducted against homosexuals." So, going on from there, the term for this persecution was popularized by David K. Johnson's 2000 book, which studied the anti-homosexual campaign, The Lavender Scare. The book drew its title from the term Lavender Lads, used repeatedly by Senator Everett Dickerson as a synonym for homosexual males in 1952. Dickerson said that a Republican victory in November elections would mean the removal of the Lavender Lads and from the State Department. The phrase was also used by Confidential magazine, a periodical known for gossiping about the sexuality of politicians and prominent Hollywood stars. So, homophobia really became pertinent, and it was kind of like during that whole transitional time where like we need to keep God in the country, women barefoot in the house, and men at their jobs, and the boys coming home from war and all that other stuff. So it was very uh, biased, as most homophobia and anti-LGBTQ uh, rhetoric is. It goes on to say that well before the congressional investigations of the 1950s, U.S. institutions had already developed an intricate and effective system of regulations, tactics, and personnel to uncover homosexualities that would become enforcement mechanisms during the Lavender Scare. This system was related to the general expansion of the bureaucratic state during the late 19th century, with institutions that increasingly systematically categorize people as units or fit, including homosexualities in the unfit category, along with people who are designated as criminally insane or morally deprived, even though they did not consistently take regulatory actions until later. Margaret Kennedy and Michael S. Sherry have stated that the Cold War homophobia, as well as the moral sex panic that dates back to the Great Depression, occurred in context of perceived shifts in gender relations, race relations, and ongoing dislocations of late capitalism, continuing urbanization, economics, the foreign crisis, post-war adjustment, and the enrichment of consumer society and culture allegedly dominated by women. Despite this, exclusions of gays from the civil service, on the other hand, did not seem to be considered prior to the Cold War. In contrast to the military, the United States, the States Department was unconcerned about gays in war. The issue was not on the public's radar either, except perhaps in the sense of perceptions of the diplomatic corps as consisting of effete privileged types. So, like, effeminate privileged types. So, you have the Cold War that's happening. You have the men who are coming back from World War I, and you have the country in a whole recovering from the Great Depression. You have the prohibitions of the 1940s. So this is still a very volatile time period during history where, you could still be beaten, battered, and killed just because you loved somebody of the same gender. There were transgender people at the time, but they still had to lead a very double-edged life. So in underground clubs where it was okay for gay and lesbian men and women to get together and drink and dance and just have a society, you would get like somebody pretending to be gay and doing that whole gay for pay thing where they would find out where these clubs were, get kind of established at the club, and then like go run and tell the authorities that, hey, over here under this library or whatever, there is a gay bar that happens. And so you would have these police raids and rushes that would come through and take you to jail because you were gay or lesbian. And if you were found to be within the government, or if you had other kind of jobs that were prolific, it was kind of a smear on your reputation. And that whole term of like, you're never going to work in this town again, kind of where that comes from. So imagine going to your favorite watering hole and you are talking to whoever, and all of a sudden a bunch of cops come in and arrest everyone there, including the person behind the bar running the bar, like whoever the property belongs to getting arrested, like all the way up the ladder, and you all being prosecuted for immoral activities. And that's where a lot of today's LGBTQ laws come from, is from things like the Lavender Scare, where you are finding these, like, this is what happened then. We don't want that to happening anymore. So, yeah, it was still just a volatile powder keg of bullfuckery that was happening. It goes on to say that in 1947, at the beginning of the Cold War and the heightened concerns about internal security, the State Department began campaigns to rid the department of communists and homosexuals, and they established a set of security principles that went on to inspire the creation of a dual loyalty security test, which became the model for government agencies as well as the basis for a government-wide security program under President Dwight D. Eisenhower's administration. Under the criteria of the State Department's security principles, disloyal persons included communists, their associates, and those guilty of espionage, along with the persons known for habitual drunkenness, sexual perversion, moral turpitude, financial irresponsibility, and a criminal record, and were to be denied federal employment, with the inclusion of sexual perversion amongst those considered unsuitable for federal employment. Discrimination against homosexuals was implicitly built into the State Department's policy, and it was grandfathered into the federal government protocol and procedure. Between 1947 and 1950, over 1,700 applicants to federal jobs were denied positions due to allegations of homosexuality. So, even past this time period, up until like really kind of recent times, I would say the revolution of like LGBTQ community really coming into power in like 2000 to 2005, you could be fired for being gay. If you were thought that you were gay, if it was suspected that you were gay, or whatever. And during the AIDS crisis and stuff, you had same-sex couples who had built their lives together, that had worked their jobs in secret, or sometimes not in secret, but they spent their whole lives together building homes or whatever. And then when the AIDS crisis hit, then you had them being separated, and the family members are like, I don't know who the hell this person is. I don't care who they are to my son or daughter. They cannot be in here, and they have no right to make any kind of medical decisions, last will or right decisions, and they have no legal ground or standing to be able to claim the house, the bank accounts, anything that these two people have built and put together. It goes to the family who has the best lawyer. So, it was also taken into consideration that because it was moral ineptitude and a religious sin, it was that we're awarding the plaintiff's family for damages done to their son by means of homosexuality, because the defendant over here is saying that they were together or whatever. So the defendant is the one who is like in the wrong here, because if they were not morally corrupt, they would not have corrupted this person, and blah blah, a whole bunch of bullshit. a lot of rhetoric that should not be in politics ended up in politics, and we are still seeing that today. People's religious ideals and ideologies are being forced on other non-religious followers. So you have things like the hot topic issue of abortions and all that other stuff being presented in a religious aspect within a government setting. And, it's a clash of ideas because there's that separation of church and the state. So, just because you believe in the Bible or you're a Christian or XYZ, whatever, does not mean that your ideas should influence the voting and the freedoms of other people. So this power struggle has been going on for hundreds of years. Like, it's just ridiculous how it goes on and on. But going on, the language of the Lavender Scare was purposely vague as intended, and instead of being referred to directly, homosexuals and perverts were often called moral weaklings, sexual misfits, moral risks, misfits, undesirables, or persons with unusual morals. The euphemism term security risk was thought by many people at the time, and many historians since, assumed to be a simple or simply a lesser version of a communist. Somebody with communist sympathies but no outright party connections. Loyalty risks and security risks were considered very similar or essentially different terminologies for the same thing. But when defining the difference between loyalty risk and security risk, government officials typically explain that loyalty involved a current state of mind, a willful desire to betray secrets, while security involved behaviors or associations that might lead one inadvertently and unwillingly to betray secrets in the future. Thus, the government and the State Department gave themselves the ability to expel government officials without any evidence of them being a communist, but by purely the risk that they may be due to inadvertent tendencies and possibilities. So, much like the witch hunts of Salem, Massachusetts, you have the witch hunts of suspected gay people. So just because you pissed like Dorothy, the secretary, off, she could then go and say, hey, I know for a fact that Harold Johnson is a homosexual. And because he's homosexual, this is the reason I'm telling you this. And I saw him exchanging a kiss between him and Gerald Lewis in accounting as they were entering the men's restroom together or whatever. It could be complete hearsay accusations, but that was enough to, one, launch an investigation, two, call into question anything that you have done during your employment, and third, could smear your good name and cause you to lose everything, all credibility, all your assets, everything, because you were suspected of being gay. No, actual damning evidence, just the suspicion of you being gay or lesbian. So, again, this is why Pride Month is so important, and why people, the rainbow flag, you see it flying or whatever, and people think, oh, it's just the gay agenda. The only agenda that most LGBTQ people have is just to have equal rights, have the same freedoms afforded to everyone under the Constitution, and being able to have autonomy and representation with taxation, and being able to legally marry, have homes, adoptions, whatever else. Everything that a straight couple would be able to have is what the LGBTQ community's agenda is. Now, you're probably thinking, well, we have all these labels, we have pronouns, we have people saying that there's 52 million different sexualities and blah, blah, and that's bullshit. And, but that is a completely different topic that I will touch on and try to bring to light better information and going from there. But, some of this, like, obsolete ways of thinking is being dragged behind the progression of the LGBTQ community. So, even before 1947, even before the 1947 establishment of the state's Department of Security principles, the United States military had developed discriminatory policies targeting gay men and lesbians. In 1940, President Roosevelt and his Selective Service advisors are convinced by psychiatrists of the need to implement screening programs to determine the mental health and potential are the determine the mental health of potential soldiers as to reduce the cost of psychiatric rehabilitation for returning veterans. Although the initial plan for psychiatric screenings of the military recruits included no direct reference to homosexuality, within a year, direct references were added. This development in the military bureaucratic processes contributed toward the momentum of the military's preoccupation with homosexuality during World War II. The new psychiatric screening directives and procedures introduced to the military the idea that homosexuals were unfit to serve in the armed forces because they were mentally ill, a change from the military's traditional way of approaching homosexuality as a crime during World War I. Punishment of homosexual soldiers was first codified in American military law, and during World War II, final regulations were declared, and homosexuals were banned from all branches of the military in 1943. Despite all the regulations, the need for troops allowed for loopholes regarding the acceptance/rejection of homosexuals to fight in war. Around 4,000 to 5,000 out of 18 million men that had been considered were turned away. Those serving in the military were ordered to report homosexual acts by other soldiers that were serving. Between 2,000 and 5,000 soldiers were suspected to be homosexuals in the military, where women were discharged. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling right now. Between 2,000 and 5,000 soldiers were suspected to be homosexuals in the military, where women were discharged at higher rates than men. So because there were no female soldiers, the guys had to get their jollies off with other guys, which promoted what? Homosexuality. Not really how that works, but I guess utilizing reptilian brain, that's how it works, right? So, it goes on to say, if the influx of people into Washington, D.C. during the New Deal created the urban and professional environments that allowed gay and lesbian subculture to flourish, then World War II accelerated the process. For many lesbians and gay men, the war was a national coming out experience. Mobilization for World War II and the war experience gave birth to a new addition to the American social urban landscape. The lesbian and gay community, to many Americans, this visible homosexual subculture, or this visible homosexual subculture seemed to prove their suspicions that the war had loosened moral codes, bonded sexual or broadened sexual more, and I think that was supposed to be broadened sexuality more, and certainly represented a vibe to threaten ideas of the gender roles, heterosexuals, and the nuclear family. After the war, families were united as Americans struggled to put their lives back together. A national narrative rigorously promoted and propagated idealized versions of the nuclear family, heterosexuality, and traditional gender roles in the home and workplace. So, because you had these gender roles that the man went to work, the woman stayed home, did the cooking, did the cleaning, she ran the home and took care of the kids, where just a few years prior, you had the men going off to war and the women having to step out of the kitchens into the factories and take up things like baseball to keep America's pastime, active. So you had the first formation of the all female baseball. You can see that in the movie with Tom Hanks and Gina Davis called A League of Their Own. It's got Madonna and Rosie O'Donnell and a bunch of other really big key players in that, and it was actually really groundbreaking and just like, wow, okay. So you have the women stepping out of the kitchen into the factories and taking up the slack where the men were normally there. Plus, they're staying at home having to raise the children and do everything that their gender role says. So you have this Rosie the Riveter revolutionary moment, and then the boys come home from war, and the women are like, no, we kind of like working. We like, having our own spending money and stuff like that. And you had the ideology and like the mindset of, no, the women need to go back into the kitchen and return to their gender role. And because you're not going to send the boys coming home from war into the kitchen. They did what they're supposed to do. They went to war, they fought the battle, they did what, oh, men. So you had the clash of the sexes that was just like, no, we don't want to go back to just being housewives. We want to have the ability to work and have equality. And so, you have this whole melting pot of different things happening. You have men and women who were secretly gay in the military, who, while they were in the military, connected with other people and had these entire romantic lives. And then when they went home, they had to leave their partner behind and go back into being Mr. and Mrs. Smith instead of Mr. or Mr. Smith, or Mrs. and Mrs. Smith. So, there was a lot of rhetoric and stuff that was just like, well, shit, we had to show our power in the war, but at the same time, we really didn't think this out. Like, how is this going to work? And, it was seen as your not, I'm trying to think of a good word to use, but like your patriotic duty. If you are a good red-blooded American, you are supposed to want to go to war. And there were hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of men and women that did not want to go to the war. And still to this day, we have hundreds of thousands of men and women who don't want to go to war. But you also have this like patriotic duty that, because there's communism and the Cold War and all this other stuff going on, that if you did anything outside the norm, then not only could you be ostracized by your own sex, but you could be ostracized by everyone else in the community. Oh, well, Jim didn't go to he didn't go to war, or he didn't get signed up or whatever, so what's wrong with him? Is he, or um the women would start to gossip and like ostracize the other housewives of the men who didn't go to war. Like, oh, who really wears the pants in the family? That whole stereotype. And that's kind of where the saying came from. Who wears the pants in the family? Is it the man, or is it the woman? Or, and a lot of times, uh, lesbians and gay men would marry one another to form the ideal nuclear family, have children, and all the stuff that they were supposed to do, but still lead secret lives so that they could have a life. So that's the whole idea of, being on the down low or whatever, comes from that, because your lesbian wife really doesn't want to sleep with you, and your homosexual husband really doesn't want to sleep with you. So you got to get your needs met elsewhere. And so you just had all of this like really negative stuff happening during this time period that really kind of jostled stuff. And people, as much as people want to believe that homosexuality and the LGBT community is brand new, it's not. There, it comes from Greece and the Roman Empire, and there's accounts of it in feudal Japan, and like all throughout the world, there is gay and lesbian persons talked about in every single culture. In the Native Americans, it was called twin flame, or two spirited person, because they believed that the spirit of a man and a woman lived within the person's body. And so in Native culture, you were a twin flame, or a two spirited person, and you were seen as divine because you had both male and female qualities and aspects. And so it was not uncommon in tribal life to have these duality couples. And it's always just been kind of swept under the carpet, like, no, that doesn't exist, no, that doesn't exist. But it has, and it does. And there is Greek culture that talks about like bedding a young man. By today's standards and ideas, it would be like child molestation. But however, back then, you were considered a man at like 13 years old, and you were almost worshipped for your young, vigorous youth. And so, yeah, by today's standards, a 14, 15-year old boy is, off limits. But back then, you were a man. You were already going to war. You already had a family. You already like did whatever. And so, homosexuality has been around forever, and it's not something new, and it's not something that's going away. That is why it is so important to learn these histories, because these histories are not being taught in school. But you can learn about the Holocaust, you can learn about slavery, you can learn about like everything else, but let's not talk about this particular batch of history, because that is somehow immoral and wrong and whatever else. So, you have a lot of the LGBTQ youth who have a very obscure historical reference and don't know about people like Brandon Tina or Harvey Milk or Matthew Shepard or things like that that give them the ability to hold hands with their boyfriend or their girlfriend or their person or whatever label that they might be using. And so you have a lot of people that are just like, no, you can't do this, but it's ingrained it's ingrained to be attracted or whatever else. And again, that's a whole nother video or whatever, but I just wanted to kind of quickly touch on the topic of the lavender scare. So there's a lot more that goes into this, but I noticed that the video is almost at 40 minutes. And so um, I'm going to break it into 2 parts because I know, actually, I'm probably going to break it into 3 parts. But anyways, yeah, so that's what's the lavender scare is all about, and there's more that you can learn about it. There was a really good TV show that came out not too long ago called My Fellow Traveler or My Fellow Travelers or something like that. And it talks about the lavender scare and how tense things were and how involved things were and how you had the African American community who also had LGBT members trying to integrate with the white LGBT members and just everything in between. Very good very good TV show. I highly recommend going to watch it. So if you like these spotlight segments, please let me know. Put them in the comment section down below. If you have a particular subject that you would like for me to talk about, again, let me know. Put it in the comment section down below, and I will do my best to look it up. And yeah, until next time, I will talk to you all later. Bye, guys.